Undercover boss orders breakfast at his diner stops cold when waitress says one tip change could transform staff lives. Early morning at neighborhood diner, the breakfast spot Michael Foster had poured his heart into the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the crisp morning air. The warm yellow lights cast a glow over the old wooden tables, revealing the scratches etched by time. Michael, now 50 CEO and founder, sat alone in a corner, hiding behind a simple gray jacket and thin-rimmed glasses like an ordinary customer stopping by for breakfast. His eyes swept across the familiar space. Each chair, each picture on the wall, each small vase by the window, everything looked the same, yet something in his heart felt different. The warm coffee aroma mixed with the scent of crispy toast, evoking memories of the early days of the cafe, the bustling mornings, the laughter of the staff, their eyes sparkling with hope as they received fairly distributed tips from his own hand. Back then, he'd made a silent promise. This will be your second home, a place where every drop of sweat is rewarded. But today, a tightness rose in his throat, as if that coffee scent was masking something rotting beneath the surface. A faint clink from the kitchen door snapped him back to reality. A young waitress approached, her hands trembling as she carried a breakfast tray. The cuffs of her uniform were faded, her hair slightly disheveled, her face pale and marked with exhaustion. Her eyes paused on his table, hesitant as if she wanted to say something. She lowered her head slightly, placed the tray of toast on the table, and the soft clink of the spoon on the plate sounded oddly sad. Michael looked up and met her eyes brimming with worry and resignation. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling, as if it had been waiting for this very moment to be set free. If tips here were just shared fairly, everyone could afford to eat every day. The words, so simple yet so piercing, stabbed into Michael's heart. He froze, the coffee spoon falling from his hand and clattering against the porcelain plate with a cold, hollow sound. In that moment, all the old memories flooded back the staff's hopeful eyes when he'd shared tips, the promises of a fair workplace where everyone was treated like family. And now just one sentence had exposed a harsh truth. In the place he had once called a second home, the tipping policy, which he had once proudly seen as a symbol of fairness, had been twisted, turned into a tool to hold down the very people he had cherished. Just a single sentence, and his heart ached. Michael looked up, his eyes frozen in the yellow light. For a brief moment, he saw himself from years ago, the hopeful founder, now a stranger in the very place he had built. Questions echoed in his mind. Did I let this happen? Did I unknowingly turn this place into one where the hardest workers end up bearing the brunt? From that moment on, Michael knew he could no longer sit still. He had to seek the truth, to fight for fairness, or else his dream would remain nothing but a shadow in this morning cafe. Michael Foster, now 50 years old, the founder of the famous neighborhood diner chain, the place where he had poured his heart and faith, building it into a second home for all his employees. It was once a place where he believed every drop of sweat would be rewarded with kindness and fairness, where every meal was not just a plate of toast or a steaming cup of coffee, but also a symbol of sharing, of trust ignited in the eyes of the staff. But recently, neighborhood diner had changed. Revenue had started to decline, employees were quitting more often, and customer complaints seemed to multiply. A gloomy shadow was seeping into every corner, something Michael never imagined would happen, in the very place he had invested his whole heart. A once bustling restaurant now seemed filled with empty stares and averted gazes behind the counter. That morning, Michael sat quietly in a corner of the diner, disguised as a stranger, to witness firsthand what was happening. He chose a table near the POS counter, where the yellow light shone down on the tiled floor, revealing every footprint of those who had worked morning and afternoon shifts. The sound of the POS machine rang out regularly, each beep slicing through the air like a knife. Each sound in the past had made Michael proud of the transparency of the fair tip distribution system he had designed to protect the hardest workers. But today, that same sound made his heart sink, like a warning of the truth he was about to discover. He noticed the eyes of the staff in the diner. Some were chatting brightly with customers, looking confident, uniforms, perfectly ironed eyes glinting with triumph. But next to them, Michael saw the lost looks of those working, the low traffic shifts, weary expressions, trembling hands carrying trays of toast watches, ticking away the slow hours where tips were so sparse they barely covered a meal for the day. The yellow light cast over their faces, highlighting the dark circles under their eyes, the sweat trickling down their temples. Michael swallowed hard. His heart ached as he imagined the dream of fairness he had built being twisted into something cold and unfamiliar. He overheard murmurs, tips being unfairly distributed, subtle threats, sighs of exhaustion. Michael knew that just one glance, one word, could bring everything to light, and he had to be the one to see it with his own eyes. He couldn't just sit in the director's chair and believe everything was fine. Because if Neighborhood Diner was no longer a second home for those he had called family, then all the fairness he had built was just a fragile dream in the yellow light of that day. Michael sat silently in the corner of the diner, the yellow light streaming through the window, casting shadows on his face lines that had once been colored with hope and ambition. He sipped a cold coffee, his eyes tense, watching every small movement at the service counter. Every staff member's step, every whispered exchange, felt like a puzzle piece he had to piece together himself. He noticed a group of young staff members, perfectly ironed uniforms, polished black shoes, eyes full of arrogant confidence. They walked through the diner with the air of those who already had their reward in hand. They were assigned to the busiest shifts where tips flowed like water. The yellow light shone on their faces, highlighting the triumphant smiles, the smiles of those who believed the outcome had already been decided. In the meantime, in a corner of the diner, the young waitress, the one he had once believed was the symbol of diligence and dedication, was quietly wiping down tables, gathering abandoned plates of toast, her hands trembling as if clutching her own weariness. The yellow light revealed the dark circles under her eyes, marks of sleepless nights and mounting worries. Her hair was slightly greasy, her eyes distant as if searching for a place to breathe amidst a sea of strangers. Michael furrowed his brow, his heart tightening, as if someone was squeezing it when the young waitress slowly placed the breakfast tray on his table. She bowed her head slightly, her voice trembling, as if mustering all her strength to speak. If tips here were distributed more fairly, everyone could have enough to eat every day. A sentence that seemed so simple, yet felt like a knife thrust straight into Michael's heart. He remembered the early days when he personally distributed every tip to the staff, their eyes then shining like stars, eyes of trust, of hope, that fairness would always have a place here. Now just one short sentence had exposed a harsh reality. That dream of fairness was being betrayed right at the place he had once called a second home. In that moment, a janitor pushed a mop bucket past his hand, gliding lightly over the mop handle, as if gathering the last fragments of trust that remained. He cast a glance at Michael, then spoke in a low, cold voice. Here, the ones who work the hardest are also the ones who are the most shortchanged. Those words felt like an alarm bell echoing through every corner of the diner, awakening all the dreams of fairness Michael had once built with his whole heart. His heart pounded each beat like a reproach. Did I let this happen? For a brief moment, Michael looked around the diner, the yellow light illuminating every face, every trace of fatigue, every distant gaze, all of it like a painful cut carved deep into his heart. And he knew that very moment changed everything. Neighborhood Diner, once called a second home, now challenged him to stand up and face the truth. The dream of fairness had collapsed right before his eyes. Under the yellow light, Michael closed his eyes to feel every breath, the breath of a place he had once believed was safe, a home for so many people. But now, it no longer felt like the breath of hope, but something withered and exhausted. The POS machine's regular beeping sounded like the heartbeat of a false heart, reminding him of a system that had once been his pride. In the corner of the diner, his gaze landed on Lily, the young waitress with thin, weary hands, ending her shift. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting Michael's. Her eyes were filled with confusion, mingled with a faint glimmer of hope, struggling to survive in an atmosphere of injustice. Michael clearly saw the sweat beating on her temple, those small shoulders bearing the weight of a day's struggle for survival with no end in sight. Every step she took was slow, as if she were fighting her own fear of being abandoned. Michael suddenly felt a heavy weight pressing on his chest, a weight of guilt, of all the questions he had neglected for so many nights. He wondered, why did she have to tremble in front of her colleagues? Why did she have to hold back tears to continue working in a place that was supposed to be her second home? A home he himself had once promised to protect. At the POS counter, the faint greenish glow flickered on the screen where just one click could change everything. Michael saw a group of employees whispering among themselves, their eyes shining with triumph. A young staff member holding a mop darted a quick glance at Michael, as if to scrutinize him. Each beep rang out like an invisible dagger, carving deep into the trust that Michael had painstakingly built over the years. Memories of the very first days at Neighborhood Diner came flooding back, the image of himself standing behind the toast counter, distributing each tip by hand. Everyone's eyes then lit up like stars, their smiles warming his heart. He remembered the voice of a young staff member from back then, saying, "Thank you, boss, for giving me hope. I know I'm valued here." Yet now, just one glance from Lily, lost and exhausted, was enough to make that dream come crashing down. Michael gently reached out to touch the tray of toast resting on the table. A tear slid down his cheek, falling next to the plate and mixing with the steam of the coffee he hadn't yet sipped. He realized the worst thing wasn't the stolen tips, but the stolen trust. He couldn't just sit there any longer. The faint laughter of the trusted staff group echoed from the other side of the counter, urging Michael to stand up. But he held back his eyes, sweeping the entire diner. He saw the tired gazes, the thin hands washing dishes, mopping the floor. He saw Lily standing alone in that sea of strangers, carrying the weight of a fair dream that he had once given a name. Michael knew this was the moment that would decide everything. He was no longer just a silent, anonymous customer. He was the founder, the one who had poured his whole heart into this place, and now he had to rise up. One decision, just one action, could save it all. And at that moment, the warm yellow light reflected in his eyes, the resolute eyes of a father about to stand up to fight for the justice owed to his spiritual children. Michael sighed, each breath heavy but determined. In that instant, he knew he could no longer wait. Michael sat silently, his eyes sweeping the diner, the place he had once cradled like his own child. The yellow light from the ceiling lamp highlighted every wrinkle on his face, etching the marks of the years and all the sleepless nights of worry. His heart felt heavy as everything seemed to be falling apart right in front of him. He quietly observed the group of young staff, their uniforms pressed neat and tidy, their steps relaxed and confident as if every reward had already been secured. They were always assigned to the busiest shifts where tips flowed like a river. The yellow light highlighted their faces, revealing their triumphant smiles, the smiles of those who believed they had already won. Their eyes gleamed with self-satisfaction, as if everyone else's hard work was merely to decorate their success. Meanwhile, Lily, the young girl with trembling hands, was still quietly wiping every table, gathering every leftover toast plate. The yellow light fell on her worn-out shirt, her eyes distant, as if searching for something she had never found. Michael clearly saw the dark circles under her eyes, signs of sleepless nights of worries that cut deep into the heart of this young woman. She was always assigned to the slow shifts where tips were so scarce they couldn't even buy a decent dinner. Michael felt his blood boil, his hand clenched into a fist. His gaze stopped at the POS counter where the cold, pale, greenish light illuminated the face of a young employee. The young man's fingers danced across the screen like a pianist, playing the keys, each beep sounding like a dagger, cutting into the trust that Michael had painstakingly built. Michael could see each tip amount pop up and then disappear as if that green light was devouring the sweat and tears of people like Lily. His heart ached when he discovered the POS had been tampered with. A group of managers and trusted employees had secretly edited the tips, turning the sweat of one into rewards for others. A cruel illusion choking the fair dream that Michael had built from the very beginning. Everything Michael had once believed in was now being betrayed by the very people he had trusted. He remembered the early days when he personally divided each tip for his staff, their eyes shining like stars, the eyes of those who believed that with enough effort, every drop of sweat would be justly rewarded. Now that light had vanished, leaving only confusion and fear that Michael saw in Lily's eyes whenever she glanced at the POS, the place where just one click could crush a person's hope. Michael knew Lily had summoned all her courage to secretly document every piece of evidence, small notes, edited tip amounts, unfair shift rosters, threatening messages. But she was too afraid of retaliation, too afraid of losing the only job that kept her afloat. He imagined her trembling hands placing pen to paper, her eyes darting around the cafe like a thief of light, praying no one would notice. His heart throbbed painfully, each breath heavy with the question gnawing at his soul. How did I let this happen? The yellow light shone on his face, highlighting the crow's feet, the marks of years of dedication, of sleepless nights building a fair, decent neighborhood diner. Michael understood this was not just a battle against a corrupt POS, but a battle to reclaim the trust that had once been given to him with all their hearts. And he knew just one decision, just one click, could reignite the flame of fairness, rekindling the dream he had poured his heart into building. Michael sat frozen, staring at his trembling hand on the now cold coffee cup. The last few black drops at the bottom reflected the pain burning inside him. He had once been proud of this place. Neighborhood Diner once called it the second home for young people dreaming of a better life. But now the cafe's air felt heavy as his own heart. His eyes wandered across each staff member's face. Every look, every gesture felt like a broken piece of the dream he had so painstakingly created. Amidst the hustle and chatter of the busy hours, there were smiles on the faces of the trusted staff, the ones given the busiest shifts with the highest tips. The yellow light shone on their faces, highlighting their smug expressions as if they already owned all the rewards. Their eyes exchanged secret glances, subtle nods that hinted at a power game only they knew how to win. In a corner of the cafe, Lily, the young girl with tired eyes, was still quietly cleaning, gathering up the leftover toast plates. Drops of sweat ran down her temples, each salty drop reminding Michael of all her efforts that had been drowned out by injustice. Her hands trembled, her eyes flickered toward the POS counter, where the pale green light cast on the cold face of a young employee. He was still tapping the screen quickly, each beep sounding like a knife cutting into Michael's heart. He saw clearly each of those clicks was another tip, vanishing money earned through sweat and tears, being snuffed out in an instant. That very green light was devouring the fairness he had once painstakingly built with his heart. Michael clenched his hands until they were white, his heart pounding wildly, each beat like a rebuke. How could I have let this happen? He remembered the early mornings when the cafe was just a small room with a few worn tables. He would personally divide each tip, the staff's eyes then shining brightly, like stars in the night sky that he could never forget. But now those stars had all gone out, replaced by fear, tired eyes, and tears that Lily tried so hard to hold back. Michael knew well Lily had risked everything to secretly record it all, every edited tip amount, every unfair shift, every threatening message she kept hidden. Those little papers were now like fragile tickets of hope, containing an entire life teetering on the brink of survival. He pictured her eyes scanning the cafe, her trembling hands, placing pen to paper, the eyes of someone too afraid to shout but too strong to bow her head. The yellow light shone on Michael's face, highlighting the crow's feet that marked the passage of time, the night spent agonizing over tip reports, the worries about making Neighborhood Diner a decent and fair place. Michael understood this wasn't just a battle against a corrupted POS, but a battle to reclaim the trust of those who once called this place their second home. He looked up at the POS screen, the pale green light on the young employee's face, highlighting the cold eyes of someone crushing the hopes of people like Lily. In that moment, Michael realized just one right decision, just one click, could sweep away the deception and rekindle the stars that had dimmed on the faces of those who once believed in him. No, I will not let this continue. He thought, his voice hoarse but firm. Everything he had built, everything he had once been proud of, could not be destroyed by a handful of cheats. Michael knew one decision, one click could change everything, and he was ready for a battle to reclaim fairness, to reclaim the dream he had once given his whole heart to build. Amid the sound of clinking plates and the gentle tapping of coffee cups, Michael Foster slowly stood up. The yellow light from the old ceiling lamp shone on his hair, now speckled with gray, highlighting the lines of the years he had devoted to building Neighborhood Diner into a second home for so many staff. Now his voice rose warm but resolute, like a blade forged from countless sleepless nights. This is your sweat and tears stolen by the very managers who should have protected you. From today, every tip will go to the person who truly deserves it. The air in the cafe suddenly thickened, as if every breath was suspended in the air. All eyes turned toward him with looks of surprise, worry, and a glimmer of hope. All idle chatter fell silent, leaving only the soft click of the POS machine, a sound Michael had once proudly considered a symbol of transparency, but now it sounded like a bitter confession. The green light from the POS screen illuminated the manager's face, his head bowed, trembling. Sweat streamed down his temples, glistening with shame and fear, the sweat of a man exposed before justice, under the eyes of those from whom he had shamelessly stolen the sweat of survival. Michael scanned the cafe, his gaze stopping at Lily, that young woman who just this morning had been huddled over a table. Her eyes hesitant, as if all hope had been extinguished, now held her head high. Tears sparkled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of fear or helplessness. They were tears of a faith that had just been named justice. The yellow light illuminated her face, turning her into a beacon of hope for all those who had silently clenched their teeth and endured. In that moment, Michael felt his heart racing, beating in sync with the breaths of those around him, the people who had once called this place their second home. He understood justice was not only in the tip amounts or the shift schedules scribbled down by deceit. Justice was in the eyes of those listening to him, in every drop of sweat that fell on every piece of toast, in every tear shed on every workstation. And he knew today justice had been named. The late morning sun's golden light still danced through the window frames, weaving its way across the cafe's interior. A place once filled with laughter and sweat, today, it was witnessing a new chapter being written by the hearts of those who had believed in it. Lily, the young woman who once bowed her head as she wiped down tables with trembling hands, now stood tall behind the counter, her worn uniform still faded but her eyes shining brightly. Michael Foster had given her a chance, a well-deserved opportunity, to become a symbol of resilience and justice. She was promoted to shift manager, her eyes radiant and her smile brimming with hope. The yellow light shone on her face like a lamp, illuminating the very path she and her coworkers had long yearned to find. Now, under Lily and Michael's leadership, all staff received their tips fairly. No one had to go without food or eat leftovers anymore. No more sleepless nights worrying about rent, electricity bills, or tomorrow's breakfast. Tips, once small but holding the weight of hard work and trust, were finally returned to those who deserved them. Michael stood quietly observing this scene, the yellow light revealing the crow's feet on his face. In his heart, everything settled into one simple yet profound realization. Just one click on the POS, just one short meeting to clarify the tip-sharing policy. That was all it took to change an entire system. Justice, it turned out, did not reside in endless revenue reports, but in the very hearts of the people who had built this place together. He watched Lily smiling brightly, her eyes shining like stars. Michael suddenly thought, a single tear changed an entire system, and he knew that he himself had changed too. No longer just the CEO of a diner chain, but someone who had rekindled faith in fairness, kindness. Justice doesn't reside in revenue reports, but in how you treat the people who poured their sweat and tears into building this place.